Hey everybody, welcome to the Speak Up for Blue morning show. My name is Andrew Lewin. I am the host of this show, basically. I'm a marine biologist, and I host a podcast called the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. It's audio only. You can find it on any app that you want. The idea of the show and this show is to make you aware of some of the great projects that are going on around the world, which we're going to talk about today. We also talk about news to keep you aware of what's going on in the ocean, and then just talk about marine conservation in general. On today's episode, we're going to go through each of those. We're going to talk about one project that I recently did an interview on the Speak Up for the Ocean Blue podcast. That is the Allen Coral Atlas. I'm going to give you a bit of a demonstration on that and how to use it and why it's so cool, and their new bleaching tool, and it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch that. So that's going to be coming up in just a few moments. We're also going to be talking about a news story that the Canadian government has started the process to eliminate single-use plastics in Canada nationally, which is a huge thing for this country. We see it every day. Single-use plastic, not good. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're also going to talk about conservation in general and why we need to lower our expectations in the way we do conservation, I think. And personally, I think a lot of times we look for perfection, and if we can't get perfection, we just say no to everything. And I don't think that's necessarily the way we need to go. I think we need to take a small step approach for a lot of us individually, because change is hard. And we're going to talk about that. So let's see, I get my trusty splash dive thing. Let's dive in to the episode, shall we? All right, here we go. We are going to go over to my screen here, and you can see here that we are, let me just move this out of the way. We are at the Coral Atlas. So I'm not sure how well this will do in terms of zooming and delay. So hopefully that'll be okay. But essentially what happens is when you come to the Coral Atlas, I can zoom out here. I've just zoomed in a specific spot. But when you come to the Coral Atlas, you get a world map, right? And look, I'll just refresh it, and I'll probably get the whole map. Yeah, so here we go. So you don't get the full map yet. Let me zoom out to all the areas. So here's the world map of what they cover. So this is the spatial coverage. This is a global coral reef atlas. So the idea is to show and work with partners. This is out of the University of Arizona, actually. Dr. Greg Eisner, I forget the Dr. Greg Asner's name or lab. He's the Arizona State University's director of the Center of Global Discovery and Conservation Science. And I had a great chat with him. It was actually kind of a cool story. A lot of times when I do an interview, I'll do an interview and the person will be in their office. They'll be at their home lately because of COVID. But this guy, he was out on a boat. And he was just getting off the boat, and he couldn't get off the boat sooner. So he said, "Hey Andrew, how about we just do the interview on the phone?" But my software wouldn't allow doing the interview on the phone that I was recording on. And so he's like, "All right, so why don't I just do it in my car, my laptop, and I'll just tether to my phone." So he did the whole interview in his car with the engine off, so we didn't have any background noise. This is in Hawaii, this pouring with sweat, and it was just phenomenal how we were able to get that interview in. But he was fantastic in the interview. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's in the description below. I'll put it in there for the link so you can listen to it. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all the podcast apps that you love to listen to your podcast apps on. And anyway, so we talked about this, but I wanted to give a demonstration today. So this is what you're seeing here. You're seeing the global atlas, the entire map, and you'll see there's some, you may not be able to see it completely. Let me just see if I can zoom in here. So you'll see there's like we're looking at Australia and the Southeast Pacific, and you're seeing all these like darker spots. This is where coral reefs actually are that have been mapped. So this Allen Coral Atlas project essentially has all these partners that do all of these different things. They go out, they survey, and this is like multiple partners. This is not an easy thing to gather. Takes years and years of work to gather all this data, because one group, one lab can't go out and survey all these reefs. So you have all these reefs that are around the world that are being surveyed. You get satellite imagery. You have processing for that satellite imagery. You also have actual data that people go in and they do all these surveys, and they put that data in free for us to see and able to see how the reefs are doing in terms of health, which I'll kind of go into in just a second. So if I decide to go in and zoom in, so I'm going to zoom in on Australia. We're going to go northern Great Barrier Reef up near Cairns area. Here we are. We're in Cairns. And so you'll see here, it's pretty dark blue most of the places. And then you have these little islands, looks like, and they're like shallow areas. And these are where some of the reefs are actually, that's where they exist, right? This is the Great Barrier Reef. You're looking here at an overall shot of the Great Barrier Reef. And this is where the famed Great Barrier Reef is, something I haven't gone diving on yet, which is driving me insane. But this is something that is one of the wonders of the world. It's a huge barrier reef, the largest barrier reef in the world, and it's gorgeous, and it has a lot of diversity, and it's in a lot of trouble lately with bleaching and so forth. But we need to monitor all these reefs to make sure we know their health. Now, this is a Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, so there's already a monitoring process going on along the entire Great Barrier Reef, but this is a reef where, we want to make sure we keep. So we need to make sure that we have great monitoring tactics. And there's a lot of managers out there that don't have access to data. And this is where the data comes into play. So this is where the atlas actually comes into play, and the data that they have. So here, let's just focus in on this area here, near just north of Cairns. And we're going to add some stuff up. So we have labels, we have satellite imagery. If we turn that satellite imagery off, we don't want that. We turn the base map off. We don't want that. We don't get anything. We just get the reef. We just get the satellite imagery, right? So you have satellite imagery here. This is the coastline, which is kind of beautiful. If you want to zoom in more, depending on the resolution, look, it's pretty high resolution satellite imagery that you have. You can actually see the beaches and everything that's going around here. A lot of forested area up here, looks like, right? All that green stuff. And so anyway, so it's great. So we'll put the map on, the base map on, just to give us a bit of perspective of where we are. And then this Coral Reef Watch, I haven't actually looked at this yet. You can see there's a legend here. So you can actually see, if you turn that on, we can see a bleached area alert, a hotspot. It doesn't look like it's coming in. Sea surface temperature. Oh, we have sea surface temperature here. And it looks like the satellite imagery you'd have to turn off, right? And then you'll see, I don't know what it doesn't show. I'm assuming that's warm, pretty warm water. It doesn't really show a legend here, and I can't really find the legend. So we'll have to look into a little bit that, and then the trends, and then the sea surface temperature. So usually green and light yellow are usually not as warm, not an anomaly anyway. So anyway, so that's kind of a cool thing for that Coral Reef Watch. So we're going to turn that layer off. We're going to turn the satellite imagery back on. The labels are going to stay on because we want to make sure we know where we are in the world. And then we're going to go to the Geomorphic Map. And the Geomorphic Map will show the different types of reefs that you have within the area. So when I turn this on, you're actually going to see it light up. This is kind of cool. So we kind of come in here, we'll go into this area here, and we'll say, oh, wow, look, these are the different types of reefs that you have in here. So if we go, I see a lot of blue and a lot of purple. So let's look at what the blue is here. So you have a deep lagoon, right, with sort of the darker blue, I guess you can say. I don't know my different colors in terms of like magenta and light blue. I just know light blue, dark blue, and stuff like that. So we go into, as we get lighter, we got a shallow lagoon. So we've got that right in here, it looks like. And then we've got a back reef slope. So that means it's kind of sloping down. And then we've got patch reefs, which you don't really see here. I bet you they're pretty small if you do see them. But we'll have to keep an eye out. And then you see some orange. You see a couple of plateaus here, right? You have a lot of purple. So you have terrestrial reef flat, inner reef flat, outer reef flat. So these are the flatter areas, right? And you see that. You just see the different. You just see the level of detail in the different types of reef. Normally, when we see a reef, we just see a reef. Like if I take this off, that's a coral reef right there, but we don't see what corals are there. And that's what this map this geomorphic map allows us to do. It provides us with a little bit more detail in that. I'm going to just turn this off. I'm going to go to the benthic map and turn that on. Now this is kind of interesting, and this basically is a coverage map. So how much coverage do we have of coral or algae? So with coral and algae, you see they're kind of two different things, obviously. But you have like coral reefs, you have these corals. You see your hard corals, you see your soft corals, and those are the coverages of the corals. But there's algae that goes along with that. And there's good algae, there's bad algae. There's like a purple algae, which allows, it's sort of like a calcified algae. It's good for the reefs. It's what you want to see on reefs. It's usually like a purplish, pinkish kind of algae. And you see that kind of stuff on there. But they're all sorts of algae, and they compete for space. And so that dynamic between the algae and coral, you got to be careful it doesn't get too out of whack, because then the algae will go crazy and you won't see any reefs. So here, like, we have a lot of sand, obviously, and rubble and rocks. So we're just going to turn those off because it's really affecting what we can see here. So if you turn that sand off, so if you can even see the difference. If you turn the sand back on, it kind of takes away of everything else. So let's look at that. And we see a lot of rubble, right? And we see or rubble here, and then we see a lot of rock. Obviously, corals are on rocks, so you're going to see that. So let's just keep taking these off as we go through. And now you're going to see these microalgal maps, right? These mats, sorry. And then you can see there's a lot more coral covers than we initially looked at the beginning, and coral algal cover. So that's kind of a cool thing when you see it, but it really depends on how you use these colors. These colors can really mask what is really there. So you want to make sure that you take some of these off to really be able to see these corals. And if you look kind of closely, if we focus in on this area, and you take that off, you can kind of see it gets darker in those areas, and that's where the life is, right? I don't know if we can see where seagrass meadows are. So we see algal mats, but I think the seagrasses would be more closer to the coast. Let's look in here. It looks like there's seagrass in here. So here are where you get a complex of seagrass. I bet you some mangroves along here as well. So if I take the coral off, you'll see that there's seagrass meadows right in this area here, right? Yeah, it's either that or macroalgae or microalgae. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell with this. Those colors are a little bit same. I hope nobody is red-green colorblind, because you probably see brown right here, and I apologize for that. Those are the colors that they put in. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Now, one thing that I'm really interested in, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. Oh, here are the seagrass areas right in here. These are the seagrass. But anyway, if you go out a little bit, we're going to focus in on, we'll take this benthic map off. And this is their new tool. And this is what I interviewed Greg on for the podcast, was this new tool. Now, this is something that's really interesting. It's the bleaching tool. It's to detect where things have been bleached. Now, it's confirmation of bleaching areas, and it's almost in near real time. And so this is kind of an interesting thing. I still don't know how they do the algorithm, but they use, again, their partners to be able to go out and monitor bleaching in areas where there's high sea surface temperature and where bleaching happens. If you don't know what bleaching is, essentially bleaching is where the coral loses the algae that is in there that provides color. So in a coral animal, you will have, you'll have the skeleton, which is sort of like the stony, say a stony coral. You'll have the stony coral, but then it'll have this like fleshy material on it. Those are the polyps. And then you have those polyps, you have this dinoflagellate. So it's like this phytoplankton that's in there. And it's an algae. So what it does is it actually uses photosynthesis to get all its energy, and the byproducts are actually taken up by the coral. And so the algae have a specific range of temperature that they like, and if that range goes too high or too low, they're out. They skedaddle, and that's when you get the bleaching. You get, that provides the color to the corals. And so when you see these algae go out of the corals in a mass area, you have this mass bleaching. You see all the corals go white, and it doesn't always happen right away. Sometimes there's a delayed response depending on how bad the conditions are in terms of temperature. But then when they can come back, or a different algae can come back and colonize the coral, and it can come back to life. Other times, if it takes too long for algae to come back, or the dinoflagellates to come back, we call it zooanthellae. If it takes that too long to come back, then the coral will eventually die because it won't be able to build a skeleton. It'll break off, and that's not good. So being able to detect the bleaching and be able to having management be able to see this, managers all over the world be able to see this, it's important to have something that can cover a global coverage. Now, this is still in beta, so they're still testing it out and trying to see how it works. But this is kind of a cool thing. So here we go. We have the day that the data for the week ending at May 10th. So it's all, like I said, it's near real time. And you have the bleaching level, low, moderate, and severe. So when you turn this on, you can see here that it's already lit up, which is not a good thing. We don't want to see this happen. But you'll see that in certain spots, there's low, medium, and high, right? Or low, medium, and severe. So if I go into this area here, they're looking at bleaching in this area. It's focused in this area that is, fairly low. But then there's some moderate, and then there's some severe cases here. So this is really interesting. You can go in and click on this to see how everything is calculated. But I just think this tool is so handy for managers. You can see all the bleaching areas already for May 10th. Now, this is the end of the summer in Australia. So, it was pretty hot last year, from what I recall, or from what I've been told. And so, you have more areas up here as you go north in Australia, and you're getting closer to the equator. And then it kind of dissipates a little bit, which is kind of nice. But this is the Great Barrier Reef, and this is where bleaching occurs. Now, does this happen all the time? It's a good question. If we look at the 26th, we can almost look at a week by week and see where the bleaching, you can see how it intensifies over the last couple of months. So February, there's not much bleaching in the area. You go into March, and you can see a week by week. This is really cool. You can see a week by week detail of how it intensifies, right, all the way up to May 10th. Pretty cool. I'm pretty impressed. And it goes up to May 10th, so they look like they're about 2 weeks behind in the data because it has to get processed, and they have to make sure that it's pretty interesting. But see, as managers are in mid-April, they're starting to say, okay, well, this is getting pretty bad. So now maybe they have to reduce certain things within the park that might provide worse, a cumulative effect. So if there's fishing or snorkeling or anything in the area, maybe they stop that. I don't know. I'm just guessing here. Maybe they stop that and they don't allow it to happen because more and more pressure doesn't make things good. So the less pressure we have, the better. So if the corals are able to get over this and not have to worry about divers touching it all over the place and so forth, not that it always happens, I'm sure there are rules in place, but that's something that we have to be wary of, is the cumulative effects. If there's fishing allowed in the area, maybe stop the fishing for that area, allow these reefs to recover, allow certain algae. So, see, this is what happens when we see bleaching, the zooanthellae get out of the coral, and then it comes back, or the coral, and then what happens is algae can compete and grow on these corals. Now, you want the herbivorous fish, so the fish that eat algae, you want them around to be able to feed on that algae. So I would imagine you wouldn't want to fish those fish out of the water. So if there is fishing allowed, now you got to remember the Great Barrier Marine Park has a number of management areas. So there are different areas where you can do fishing. There are different areas where you can't do fishing. Like ecotourism or tourism activities are allowed in certain areas, not allowed in other areas. Some areas you're not even allowed to go into unless you're a scientist or part of the park. And then there are some that are just nobody's allowed to go into. So these are very, very important areas. So you just see how this map can really show some pretty cool things, and looking at what's happening all around the world. We can go, like I'm showing you here in Australia, but we can go over and see what the bleaching is like in April, or what it was like in April let's look at like Borneo, right? It looks like everything, or here we can go over here. This looks like, is that Indonesia? maybe part of Indonesia. This is Borneo right here. So we can look at here. I went to Kuching a couple of years ago, and we can see what the bleaching was like there, and it looks like it was okay, right? But if I go over here, I just do a snapshot of, say, the South Pacific. It looks like there's not much data, but you can see there's data down here. That means somebody was actually doing something, right? And so I can go and I can look at how it intensified over. So if I start in March, it looks like everything was happening March and April. So now we're looking at times where there are bleaching occurring, and we're looking at there are trends. We know where it happens in April. And this is kind of nice to know from a person who doesn't study coral reefs. Obviously, people who study coral reefs probably know that there's a season where you will see these corals bleach on a regular basis, just because the heat is intensifying. It's longer if there's a long range where there's more than 10 days where it was plus 40 degrees Celsius, then you'll see more bleaching and so forth, and it intensifies. And you'll see pockets and areas where the bleaching is worse than others. So kind of a cool thing. I wanted to show you this. If you wanted to go to the website, it is allencoralatlas.org. So it's up here. I'm not sure if you can see that. You probably can't see that right now. But let me do a little text here. Oops, that's not where I want to go. Allen Coral Atlas. So allencoralatlas.org is the website that you can go to, and you can kind of have fun with it. I'll put in the link in the description. I'll put a link in the description below because I thought it'd be kind of handy to have. So that was kind of cool. All right, so let's kind of dive into our next talk. I want to talk to you about conservation. And this is something that I find is an interesting concept because, especially lately, the movie Seaspiracy came out a while ago. Not a fan of the movie for a number of different reasons, which I'm not going to get into. I covered a lot of it on podcast, and to be honest, I'm all Seaspiried out. But the movie was about sustainable fishing, and whether there's sustainable fishing or not. They concluded there's no sustainable fishing, which is false around the world. But they really talked about how there is a problem with overfishing. And there is a problem with overfishing. It's just the way they went about it, I didn't agree with. But regardless, there is an overall problem with overfishing. And we need to look at how we see seafood, or how we approach the seafood problem, and how, as consumers, we can do something about seafood. We can buy more sustainable options. We can lower the supply chain. So what I mean by that is go directly to fishers. There are now a lot of outfits and companies that come out, and you can buy directly from the fisher. It gets delivered to your door. I did an interview with Sitka Salmon Farms. I'll put the link in the description below. They were great. I talked to Nick, who was the co-founder, and talked about how he works with local fisheries, indigenous and non-indigenous in Alaska, to bring these wonderful products and all these different types of salmon, all these Dungeness crab, all this, but it's all small-scale fisheries. Nothing overfished, and it's just wonderful. So there are ways to go about doing these types of sustainable access to lower fishing. So what you do is you buy right from the fisher. So you have the fisherman goes out, buys the food, you get a box every month, and you just pay the one outfit, the whole company. They have their own processing plant. And what happens normally in industrial fishing is there's a lot of middle people in the supply chain. And that causes the price to get cheaper because there's so many middlemen. Not necessarily, it's a little cheaper, but the quality is not as good because it goes through so many middle people that the price goes up and up and up and then down. It's just they try and get as many fish as possible, and they just kind of get greedy. So they're going with the volume. They're going with quantity and not quality fish. And so we're getting a lesser product for cheaper, but it's also having more of an effect on on fishing. And we have a lot of problems with overfishing, especially in the high seas. There's a lot of undocumented, unregulated, and illegal fishing happening. So that could be a huge problem. But what we want to do is we want to cut that supply chain down and go right directly to the fishers. So we're supporting fishermen and their families, and fisherwomen, of course. So fishers and their families and their communities, and not just supporting some middle people who are just greedy and they're just trying to get some money. So we want to make sure that we go to those sustainable options. Now, those sustainable options are quite expensive. And so there are different ways that you can ensure that your fish and seafood are sustainable. And this is where I think people get to a point where there's sort of like an I guess there's one way. You can go all the way to like the extreme, or and not eat seafood at all, which is fine if that's your, like, there's a lot of people who are eating a vegetarian or vegan lifestyle, more plant-based lifestyle, which is healthy for you in a way, but also it takes away your imprint on eating meat, eating seafood in the fisheries industry and so forth. So you can go that route. You can also go the route of going right to things like Sitka salmon farm or skipperoo in Canada, where you can get seafood delivered right to your door, and it can come right to your door, which is great. And so you have that level, and you're buying right from the fisher. You kind of get a profile of different fisheries and the different fish and the different fishermen and their families and so forth. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then you have like these apps like Seafood Watch and Ocean Wise. Depending on where you are, there's always a better guide or a guide to better seafood. And Seafood Watch is probably the most popular one. Ocean Wise here in Canada has a great program. And essentially what that does is you are working, you have this app and you look at the seafood you're about to buy at the grocery store or at a fish market, and you say, okay, so you have salmon. How was it caught? Is it wild? Is it farmed? What's the better option? If you want tuna, what's the better option? Is it rod and pole? Is it caught in North America? Because there are better regulations in North America than other places. What is the best way to go about buying this fish? Now, the problem with some of those apps is the people you're asking behind the counter may not know how the fish was caught or where the fish was caught from. They should know, but they don't always know. And in that case, sometimes you have to be prepared to walk away and be like, I'm not going to buy this because you don't know the information, simple information that you should be able to know, and you don't know. So my whole point about this is to kind of lay this out, is there are different options for conservation, and the options have to fit your lifestyle. Going vegan is a difficult change when you haven't been vegan before, to opt for no seafood, no meat, no dairy. That's a big change in your lifestyle. So if you're not prepared to do that yet, that's fine. There are other options. If you still want to eat seafood, there are other options. You can cut down your imprint on overfishing, right? And I think it's the same thing when we talk about looking at single-use plastic, looking at what all the stuff we have at home. If you really want to cut down single-use plastic and your waste, you can go towards a zero-waste lifestyle where you emit no waste. You're barely putting out any kind of garbage. Everything you're using is in proper containers. They're not disposable containers. They're reusable containers. Now, I'm not talking just about a reusable water bottle and grocery bag. What I'm talking about is like not using dish detergent containers, not using not buying the containers or buying the products in the containers like the Tide or like any kind of soap detergent, any kind of like when you're looking at flour or any kind of baking products and things like that. You have special containers that you go in. So you can go in these zero waste stores, bring your containers and fill up those containers right then and there. It's all based on weight, and you purchase it and then you go back. Now there's also different things where they have like dish detergent in a bar of soap, which is kind of cool. I just learned that talking to Janine Sinclair in one of my episodes that I did early in January. And that's kind of a cool thing, because now you think about it, you don't have to buy dish detergent in a bottle, right? Because that's a plastic bottle that I'm going to throw away. And we know that sometimes these things don't get recycled. And so this is where we have sort of the idea of like there are different ways to go about and finding alternatives. So there's a zero waste lifestyle, which is kind of the extreme and difficult to attain, where you're emitting very little garbage. But there are levels to that, right? You can start slowly. You can start, just like I mentioned earlier, using a reusable water bottle. A lot of people do that now. There are so many different options. You can get branded ones, you can get non-branded ones, stainless steel that lasts forever, some that are easier to clean than others. And there's now you can almost go based on personal preference, which is a kind of a very interesting thing. So that is where we're at with reusable water bottles. You can also get, metal straws. You can get bamboo straws. You can get reusable grocery bags, things like that are readily available now because there's been a focus on that. Why drink water that is supposedly coming from Fiji when you can get perfectly good water out of the tap, maybe filtered through your fridge and cooled and put it in your water bottle, right? And so there are those are readily available, but a lot of the other things that we don't think about, like Ziploc bags, sandwich bags, do we really need those? Can we not buy containers for those? I have 2 kids. They have lunches all the time. And what I love at the school that they're at is that they have litterless lunches. And what you're supposed to do is bring everything to school where you're not throwing it out. So you have them in containers, all your food. So whether it be a sandwich, whether it be a couple of snacks, so forth, you put them all in these containers for them, and they fit it in their sandwich, in their lunchbox, and then they go to school, they come back, and they don't throw out any litter at school. So even if you have like a granola bar or something like that, and you have the wrapper on it, that's like single-use plastic. You don't need that kind of stuff. And so it's not easy to get to that point. It takes a long time. And even for me, there's a lot of plastic and a lot of containers that I have at my house that I don't really need. And it's difficult to find some of these alternatives. And just because it's a change of behavior. And it's really hard to change, because that means you have to go out of your way to do something that you're not used to. And maybe it's out of your comfort zone. Maybe you don't know where to get all the products. Zero waste stores are mostly found in most major cities, even some of the smaller cities and towns. I live in a smaller city. We have a couple of zero waste stores that have just popped up over the past couple of years. Hopefully they're doing well during COVID. But these are places that you can start to go to when you're allowed to go to stores, of course, and be able to order these types of products, or just educate yourself by going in and just walking in the store and seeing what's available. Right? And then trying products out, because there are alternatives that are presented to you, but you may not like the way the product works. So I don't even know, like this detergent soap, does it really work? I have no idea. I know from friends that it does, but I don't know if it actually works. So that's something that I would have to test out. And that means I'd have to go out, buy it, use it, see it, like really evaluate whether it works or not. Does it work in my lifestyle? How do I put it in where do I put it on my sink and that kind of stuff? It's just kind of things you have to know. And so there are different levels of conservation, especially on an individual level. When you look at sort of like conservation at home and then conservation outside your home, again, there are different levels. You can do stuff at home and look at how you can be better in terms of living for a better ocean at home by using less plastic, by using less waste, all that kind of stuff, using less energy within your home. And then you can start to go look outside your home and say, where can I really help? You can start doing local cleanups in your neighborhood. Grab a couple of neighbors, go out. I've done that a couple of times. Go out in your neighborhood, grab any kind of litter that you see, just grab it. Sometimes garbage days, they're windy. My worst nightmare. And then all of a sudden you see all the garbage go around, all the recycled materials kind of get caught in the wind, and it goes all around the neighborhood. So sometimes it's great to grab a couple of neighbors and just go out and pick up stuff as you go along. Sometimes if it's really bad, I'll grab a bag, like a reusable bag, and I'll go as I'm walking my dogs, and I'll pick up the litter that's around the neighborhood. Just if there's a lot more than I normally see. And so having this cleans up your neighborhood. Kind of a nice community project if you have your neighbors into it. And then you're able to actually talk to people about, about what you want to do, and you kind of lead by example in your neighborhood, which is kind of nice. Other things you can do is you can go to your local rivers or beaches, and you can start cleaning up around there. You can, again, grab a couple of neighbors, maybe a little bit more, maybe volunteer with an organization that's already doing it, and you start to you can clean up. So you can up that level of commitment to cleaning things up, to doing something new. You can also volunteer with organizations, maybe helping some citizen science projects, doing some work with them, gathering and collecting data, that kind of stuff. So there are different levels that you can do. You can start talking to your local politicians, one-on-ones, face-to-face, or through Zoom because of this pandemic, and start to really get into finding out what they're doing for the environment and what their policies are. And maybe if you have an opinion on it, you can tell them if you like the policies or you don't like the policies or what you'd like to see changed. These are the different levels of conservation that you can do. There is no right answer in what level that you can provide. You can provide all of them, you can provide just a bit of them, but nobody's better than the other for providing more. It really comes down to time and commitment that you're ready to put in your life. Like, let's be honest, I've had kids, they're now almost teenagers, and so they're a little bit more independent, but I like spending time with them. So sometimes spending time with them means that I can't focus on what I want to focus, maybe on a conservation level. And so it's difficult to balance that, especially if you have younger kids, right, who are doing homeschooling right now and virtual online learning because of the pandemic. You're focused on that. You're just focused on surviving. You're focused on keeping your job and that kind of stuff during this tough time. And so it's really difficult to commit to that. And that's okay. And I think we need to realize that there are a lot of people that, and I learned that through like Seaspiracy. A couple of people were criticizing people who are working in the conservation field, the marine biology field. And they said, well, if you're not vegan, you shouldn't be in conservation, which is preposterous to me. You could still be I know a lot of great people in the field of science and marine biology and aquatic biology and terrestrial biology who are avid hunters and avid fishers. And they eat seafood, they eat fish, they eat meat, and they're great, great scientists. And without them, and their contributions, we would be nowhere. So, having that to judge people based on how their lifestyle is in that respect, to say, well, you can't do conservation, is just not fair for people to do it. It's not right. And I think people need to understand that there are different levels of conservation. Now, you can motivate people to try and get to a better level of commitment or conservation, or maybe even let them know. Like I said before, lead by example. These are the things that we can do to really push things forward and do better. But the lead by example is not as intrusive. People don't get caught up and backed up into a corner, and they feel a lot better about themselves. So I think we need to really focus on that. So if you're new to conservation, if you're new to this channel, as I start to post more and more, and you start to see me throw out these little tips that you can do, know that I'm not judging you whether you do it or not. I'm hoping that you do it. I'm hoping that you find the time and be able to look at changing your behavior. There are people who have, that are in the audience right now that have more of a commitment to me than I would, or more of a commitment to the conservation than I do, because they can afford to do that and they're ready to do that. And so I think you need to really look at that and don't just go to a point where you're like, I can't have an electric car because I can't afford it because they're expensive. I can't do this. I can't do all this stuff. So I'm not going to do it at all. No, start slowly. There's definitely a scale to this, and you can always scale up if you want or scale down, but just start slowly, really get into it, understand that behavior change is really difficult, and that's what conservation is. It's a behavior change. So that's what I have to say on that. Let me know in the comments, what you think about this type of thinking. Do you think that people should go all the way, or should curtail back? Obviously, we're in a position in life, when we look at ocean conservation, we need to do more. But having more people do just a little bit is better than nobody doing anything at all, in my opinion. So that's what I have to say about that. Let's get into the final thing that I want to talk about, and we're going to dive into what Canada is doing to go single-use plastic free in the future. Now, this is something that I saw in an article. I can't find the article again, but I think it's really interesting. Canada, a while ago, when the Trudeau government came in, the government that's in now, they were a majority government. And at the time, Minister McKenna, she proposed that by 2021, this was back in 2019, I believe, that by 2021, Canada would go single-use plastic free. Now, that hasn't happened. It got delayed. There's a bit of a pandemic. And so they had to really look at different programs. They said that the program is still coming. where we're going to go single-use plastic free. What that's going to look like, I don't know. Will businesses not be able to use single-use plastics? Like you think about Tim Hortons cups in Canada or Starbucks cups in Canada, how they're not single-use, they're all single-use. Are we really going to be able to get businesses to stop? How that's going to work, all the minor details, I don't know. But with a ban on single-use plastics, that's going to help Canada in a lot of ways. And I think what we really realized is a few years ago when CBC came out with a number of articles. I think it was like a series of articles of 10 or 12 articles over the summer. They came out and they showed how recycling is not what it's all cracked up to be. And essentially what happens is when we have a great recycling program where you can put out recycling, and there's a list in each region where you have, for those in the States, it'd be counties, where you have, a list of what can be recycled in your area and what can't be. And it all comes down to a market. It all comes down to how the machines kind of separate the plastic. If there's a wax filter on it, it's not good. But they really exposed that recycling is not all it's cracked up to be. And when you recycle a bunch of stuff, some of that gets shipped, a lot of that gets shipped to island nations, like Malaysia and the Philippines, and they were sick of it. It started off with China telling the U.S. that we're not taking your plastic anymore unless it's in a specific form, and then a bunch of islands after that, another bunch of countries, I should say, after that, mostly small island communities, were saying, yeah, we're not going to do it either. Now imagine you get a population of Canada of like 36 or so million, taking all that trash and just shipping it to an island that's smaller in size for them to dispose of, right? And we pay them to do that. And if they were just sick of it, they're just like, we have no place to put it. We're not taking it. And then of course, there's organizations that come out and say, hey, these are the rivers, the 10 major rivers, and they're all in, Southeast Asia, where they're contributing to the most plastics. Maybe it's because we're shipping all the plastics to them, and their waste management system is not cracked up to what it should be here. So when we realized that, I think Canada had to make some decisions, and saying, how do we not have all these single-use plastics? How do we, beef up our recycling program? But also, how do we reduce the amount of plastics that we use? And a program like this can really help with that, with that aspect. And so they're starting to come out with it, but they can't just come in and say, tomorrow we're banning everything. Single-use plastic, you can't use anything, you can't buy it. You got to be careful because there's some businesses that are based on that. So it takes a while for that to kind of come into play. And what's interesting is that Canada came out with a study or with a statement and a report that said that many of the single-use plastics that we have are toxic to animals and toxic to the environment, which can be toxic to humans. We knew all this. This is not new news. But there's a huge significance in Canada coming out and proposing this because it provides the precedent and the evidence to start going towards that ban of single-use plastics, right? It's genius, really, if you think about it. They can't just come out and say, well, we're banning single-use plastics because people said it's bad. No, now they're going to start to put out reports and studies that are looking at the effects of animals and the environment within Canada on plastic pollution. And when we see the evidence, a lot of people are going to be like, well, now the government has the evidence to put together to go through. It's all real, it's all true, it's all scientific, but they need to put that precedent in place so that they can come out and say, yeah, we're banning single-use plastics for a reason. It's to protect our environment, protect our animals, but also to protect us. Because when it gets into the environment, plastics are made of some pretty nasty stuff. It's a petroleum product, and there are a lot of chemicals in there. And when that breaks down into the environment, that can get into our water supply. That can get into the animals that we eat. It's a big, big problem. And so when you see orcas on the West Coast dying from chemicals that are from ingested plastic pollution, that if it can take down an orca, it can take down us over time, if we eat enough of it. And so we don't realize how much we eat. Even in our sea salt, there are microplastics that are in our sea salt. And that's a problem because microplastics are even more dangerous because there are more toxins that leak from these and they come into our food. And so this is obviously a big problem. We need to stop it. And this is a way for a government like Canada to start that process, even though it's going to be a slow process. Hopefully it'll be faster than what we're currently seeing. But this is the evidence that starts to do this. And the same thing with captive whales. They did the same thing where they started to say, well, yeah, now you can't they're not banning captive whales that are in captivity now, but what they're doing is they're starting to ban no new captive whales, and they're starting to ban, the breeding programs and so forth. So we're seeing that happen slowly. Eventually, as these captive whales in marine land and other places are going to pass away at some point, there aren't going to be any new ones coming in because there's a ban on that. So this is how governments work. I think it's really interesting. If you're interested in knowing more of this, I talk about it on my audio podcast. I'll be talking about it on the channel. I'm going to have more recorded videos. I'm probably going to do these morning shows Tuesdays and Thursday mornings to be able to talk to you. They'll probably be about 30 to 45 minutes, just like this one. And so I thought, I hope you, I just hope you enjoy it. I just hope you enjoy the content. I love speaking about this. I love doing a morning show because I'm always up, because my dog's always up, and the kids are still in bed as they're getting up now. So I'm going to get to them, say hello, say good morning. But I just want to know, what you think. Let me know in the comments below. Even if you don't attend this live, just let me know if you like this kind of stuff, learning about this. If you'd like to learn about a specific topic, let me know in the comments. I'll be looking, and I'll be doing these shows every Tuesday and Thursday for a while now. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Speak Up for Blue Morning Show. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, marine biologist, and just all-around good guy, I like to think. But thank you so much again for joining us, and we will see you on Tuesday morning. And I hope you enjoy your weekend. Have a great day. Talk to you later. Happy conservation.